still call that's fatwa. But then there are fatwa in a sense of new approach, one of which might require relatively less scholarship. As the scholars say, they call it al-ijtihad al-intiqa'i, which means someone who had enough knowledge and familiarity. He's not presenting a totally new fatwa, but he has the fatwa of Imam Abu Hanifa and Shafi'i and Ibn Hanbal, okay, on a given issue. But then he compares the dalil, evidence, he's Indian, he's not Arab. And he tried to apply that to a given reality in society today. Superiority in and he said, all right, alhamdulillah, they're all great imams, you can follow either. Scholars, but at least also, in a given situation that we have today, maybe I'm more inclined to take the fatwa of Abu Hanifa on that issue. You get the point? Intiqa'i means to select one of already existing scholarly valid interpretation. Okay? It requires some qualification, but not as much as the highest level of ijtihad. They call it ijtihad mutlaq or insha'i. Even mutlaq might be different. Insha'i, which means a totally new issue. Like when the Council of Scholars, various councils actually address the issue of brain death and life support equipments and so on, artificial insemination and all of these issues, organ donation, organ transplant, stem cell research. These are not a matter of choice, unless, of course, it develops later when you get differing opinions. These were totally new issues, and obviously it requires more in-depth understanding. They say also that a mujtahid could be qualified in one area, but not in all areas. Like if you can get an economist, and I know some who had deeper knowledge of Sharia, even though they might have acquired it in non-formal manner, but they're excellent also in Islamic economics. Maybe they would be more able to give answers to some questions related to complicated economic issues of today. But the highest, of course, they say al-mujtahid al-mutlaq, which means a scholar of the caliber, not necessarily, or along the example of caliber of great scholars in the past, who have so much, not only depth, but also breadth of knowledge that they can give you fatwas in ibadat, in financial dealing, in any aspects of Islamic jurisprudence. So I think this is something also. And also to be able to communicate that in a contemporary language. Because oftentimes some people keep quoting scholars. And what they're quoting is okay, but the language used for our age might be very difficult. So a mujtahid also is an interpreter who translates a more complicated issue and very sophisticated legalistic language that was mainly scholars speaking to scholars, into a language that the educated Muslim public also can. Oh, this is a couple of more. Avoiding riddles. Again, mustalahat, terminology that are very difficult for people to understand. And the balance between, like we said earlier, of course, rigidity and looseness. One has to look at it carefully with a clean heart and mind as well, to explain the basis of fatwas. For some people, perhaps, who might not require that, it is fine. You get someone who is, for example, relatively illiterate, and all they want to see, what should I do in that case? In that case, you don't have to tell him, and the evidence is this and this and that. Maybe they're just happy and they trust you as an imam or scholar. So that's it. But now we are in the age of learning, and a lot of people who might have not gone through formal Islamic training are able to do that by reading good books by credible scholars, to have halaqat, attending of knowledge, read in the internet from correct sources. So it's useful at least to give in some simple way what is the basis of that fatwa in the Quran or Hadith for that matter, so they'd be comfortable that you're not just throwing fatwas like that. And of course, when you say haram, 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 a good mufti and a good ijtihad is not only to say what is forbidden, but what is also allowed. And if you say that this alternative is bad, try to make ijtihad to provide a good alternative. Somebody says, a practical, real example that I've been involved in, at least in the formative stage. People want to buy homes and they want to avoid mortgage. And some people want to invest money, but not by interest. When we started in Canada a long time ago, more than 25 years, I think it was more even, the Islamic Housing Cooperative. Okay, you say riba is haram, mortgage is haram, but you have another alternative. Get people to invest money Then you have a contract of equity, shared equity and rental form, totally halal. Scholars have examined that. You see what I mean? By giving other options so that people, you don't simply saying no, no, no. Yes, if it meets this kind of requirement. And that requires perhaps collaboration of both Sharia scholars as well as experts. To conclude, again, wrapping up, there is a built-in mechanism in Islamic jurisprudence that provide a great deal of flexibility and adaptability for changing times, places, again, customs and circumstances. Secondly, a major, you might say, soundbite. What is need to be reformed are Muslims, not Islam. What Islam needs is not reformation, but rejuvenation or tajdeed through the process, profound process of ijtihad. Thirdly or fourthly, there is no conceptual or historical support of the argument that nobody has the right to make any ijtihad or the door of ijtihad was closed many centuries back. The fifth soundbite, ijtihad can be done only by those who are qualified, following the proper methodology. In areas that are subject to ijtihad, you don't make ijtihad in the tawheed of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the foundations of Islam, basic pillars. And finally, the last message or soundbite, we need a balance, a just balance between stability of essentials of Islam and the dynamism of change. And just to conclude with one remark that Sayyid Qutb alayhi rahmatullah mentioned in his tafsir. He says that the question of stability and dynamism are not necessarily two contradictory concepts. In the order of the universe, everything is dynamic, everything is changing. All the heavenly bodies are in constant motion. Even things that you don't see moving, there is constant motion in the atom, in the nucleus of the atom, what they call it, electrons, protons, and so on. There is nothing totally static in this universe. However, this very renewed dynamism is subject to a given axis and orbit, that if you get the slightest deviation, the whole universe will get into chaos. Likewise, Sharia has some issues that are permanent and stable, so that you don't just make Islam's thousands or millions of Islam depending on your... These are permanent, but this must be definitive in terms of its narration and definitive in its meaning, not subject to more than one interpretation. In that case, there is no tampering with that. That kept the stability of Islamic jurisprudence for 14 centuries. So within that, you can apply the rules of ijtihad with its condition. Jazakumullah khair for your good listening. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakumullah khair, Professor Jamal Badawi, for that inspiring talk. We have now come to the crucial session of question and answers. Please confine your questions to the topic and be brief. Don't express opinions, but only ask questions. Thank you.
I was just wondering, now you have discussed in length all these things about personal...
Can you come a little to the mic? Closer.
Okay.
No, just come closer.
I mean, you have discussed these things in personal, on a personal level of things and things like that. But I was wondering, with now you mentioned something about an organization of scholars who are qualified for this ijtihad and to issue fatwas. What I was wondering was, why is this not transformed onto a political level, where these scholars will be qualified, will have the authority to say, hey, look, what you're doing is wrong, correct yourself.
Jazakallah khair, good question. Well, to start with, maybe one of the reasons the collective fatwa in the past was not very prominent is that Islamic scholars have been scattered all over the Muslim world. They had their students, but they used to travel as well, especially for Hajj. So the Hajj season was an opportunity also for scholars to compare notes and benefit from one another, and that actually contributed somehow to some sort of unification of the basic approach of interpretation, and even in some cases in some of their fatwas. The realities of the modern world, and that's a good example also, of responding to modernity without being modernism as ism. Okay? In our times today, alhamdulillah, travel has become very easy. And that's why you know that in the last many decades, actually, there have been not just one person who's a mufti. Maybe you can be mufti in a given country or given locality, that's fine. But for some of the tacky issues that require more scholarship, there have been several juridical councils, whether they under the OIC, under the Muslim World League, and others, that became more universal or international in nature. Furthermore, I understand also within big countries that has big Muslim population, there are regular meetings of the jurists. I understand in India, for example, there is like a council of ulama that they meet also once in a while, and sometimes also they are visited by some scholars from other countries, and that happens all over. More particularly, I'm referring to now to the minority jurisprudence, which is based on the same basic concept of jurisprudence, except that it focuses on problems of Muslim minorities. We find that there are several in existence. One of them, for example, in North America, it's called the Fiqh Council of North America, a group of scholars also who meet and discuss some issues of common concern to Muslims in the West. Even a very highly scholarly council has been established, it's almost, more within the last 2 decades in Europe. It's called the European Council of Fatwa and Research, which is headed by a senior scholar in the Muslim world, Dr. Yusuf al-Qaradawi, and has also members with great repute like Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya, Sheikh Faisal Mawlawi, may Allah grant him cure, and many others. And again, in this very scholarly council, there are research papers in a given theme, like family law and how to cope in the situation in the West vis-a-vis the issue of marriage, khul', divorce, and all of these issues, custody. So research papers are prepared by many qualified scholars, discussed, debated, and then oftentimes a given statement is made on a new issue or fatwa is made about that. So these are examples of variety of bodies, either on the world level or on minority levels within countries in Europe or in America, for example, that already is taking place. However, the last part of your question, I think, is very relevant. Why not also have Islamic scholars to have some agreement on the broader issues that affect the Muslim Ummah? Of course, we're using politics in the positive sense, in terms of caring about Muslim and Muslim issues all over the world, whether it's Kashmir or Palestine or Afghanistan or Iraq or Myanmar, in China, Muslim persecution in China. Alhamdulillah, also under the leadership of Sheikh Qaradawi, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward him for this, he established something known as the International Union of Islamic Scholars, which includes, of course, mainly qualified scholars with degrees, including PhDs in Islamic studies, but included also the allowed membership of people who are not scholars like myself, based on only the length of their presence in the Western world and some familiarity with the real down-to-earth problem that people face. So they did, like in the Fatwa and Research Council, also have a couple of people perhaps to see if they can contribute something about the reality, but not on the depth of jurisprudence itself. And alhamdulillah, since its establishment, it has taken very clear position about Muslim issues. And the other advantage of that council is that for that particular one, it is meant to represent all Muslims. And the president or the Amir has 4 deputies, and has always been the tradition to have one Sunni deputy of great repute, like Sheikh bin Bayya, for example, very well known, one Shia representative. There was an Ayatollah, and recently in the new election there was another Ayatollah, so at least the Shiite Muslims are also represented. There is also a representation of the Ibadi Muslims, which is more widespread in places like Oman. Sheikh Khalili, who's their Mufti, the Grand Mufti, is also a deputy of Sheikh Qaradawi. there has been an attempt that has not been succeeded so far to get a representation of the Zaydi. You see, one group of Shia, the Zaydis, are the closest actually to Sunnah. They are mainly in Yemen, but that may be because of a situation where they cannot perhaps fully agree as to who represents it. There are some factions probably, and I hope that this would be resolved, but always there have been that openness, because it is not the issues of Shia or issues of Sunnah or Ibadis that the International Union look at it, but the overarching broad issues facing the Muslim Ummah, irrespective of the particular mazhab, or even more than mazhab. If you talk about Sunnah, Shia, Ibadis, you're talking even beyond the madhahib, for example, within the Sunni tradition. So I hope that this also is a good beginning, and it is very, very well reputed. And actually, you can log into their site, and there are statements made every meeting about contemporary and pressing issues.
If you could kindly mention your name before you ask a question, it will be helpful. Thank you.
My name is Hamid. I'm sorry I'm asking a supplementary question. Forgive me for that. What I actually had in mind is, now you mentioned, mashallah, so many names of scholars. And I'm sure, I don't think 99% here, I can easily say, that includes me, we have not even heard their names. What I would suggest is that, you have a bigger public face where you will have a public spokesman, a spokesman for that organization who might, come up in front of TVs and talk about issues, political issues that really confront the Muslims, like in Kashmir, like you said.
Okay.
Right? And like you have in Afghanistan, you have Hamid Karzai. I mean, look, he is by all intents and purposes a puppet of the West. Look, scholars, what I have in mind is a body of scholars who will come out and say, look, this guy is wrong. We have to put it right. How do we do it? Not with bloodshed, but with talking, with consensus, with kind of an Islamic approach generally.
Two interrelated reasons. One is that it is relatively new, especially International Union. It's just a few years old, and of course it takes time before people recognize. Even the European Union of Fatwa and Research that was established before that, it's still relatively recent one, and still efforts are made to reach out for imams, at least within Europe and the West, because they deal with their particular problems, but also it should go beyond that. The other related reason, of course, is lack of resources. For example, the International Union of Islamic Scholars is not an organization that is dependent on any particular government. It lives on donation, accept donations, unconditional donations, including from their own members or their own executives. So, of course, you don't have these limitless resources. And we have to be aware also that some governments use their financial resources to have councils that are not really under their thumb, but influenced very much and dependent on finance. And that's why we need, and the recent meeting of the European Council, which was held in Istanbul, Turkey, just a few weeks ago, addressed that issue of the juridical aspect of waqf, the trust and endowment, because what really encouraged free, uninfluenced research of scholars in the past were the vast awqaf, trust, so that the scholars were not dependent on any government or ruler for their sustenance, and would do and courageously take this position. So inshallah, I hope it's forthcoming, and it needs some patience, you need time, and you need resources, and they're trying to cope the best they can with the limited resources available to them.
So I am sure that if they were to go for public funds, there will be many individuals who will fund them.
Thank you. Would like some others also raise questions.
Assalamu alaikum. My question is simply based on following an ijtihad. When we are reading the fatwas of the ulamas in some of the very sensitive issues in Islam, there are a group of ulamas or the muftis or the people who do ijtihad, they differ in a particular way. For an example, to say there are very sensitive issues like suicide bombing, wearing your clothes behind the ankle, or something like these sort of issues. They're very sensitive issues. But if you read and if you want to know a layman, like a layman, normal Muslim who wanted to follow the Quran and Sunnah, and if you go through this fatwa, there are very strong ulamas in two sides. There are very identified and authorized ulamas in two sides who differ in these opinions. So if a layman, not like in scholars, if a layman, if a Muslim who likes to run an Islamic life, who like to be an ideal Muslim, and to whom does he approach? Now, these two sensitive issues are there. Big ulamas, authoritative points of views. So how a normal Muslim can follow these things and run a Islamic life? That is my question.
Okay, everything has a price. Dynamism has a price. Dynamism means also, like I said, even if you're following basic methodology and abiding by the basic rules of interpretation, it is quite possible to have people differ in some opinions. But fortunately, alhamdulillah, in the case of Islam, we have never argued the oneness of Allah or some of the permanent things that are stable in our faith. So we should not feel shocked or disappointed that scholars in the past differed, or even today they differ. This is a tradition. And there are good reasons also why they differed. That could be a whole presentation by itself. And some writings actually address that issue. They differ sometimes not on the basis of the authority of the Quran and Sunnah, but there are some ahadith, not all, some ahadith that one scholar considers to be strong, other consider it weak. Some ahadith that has been classified as sahih, like Sheikh Albani, for example, had differing views. Something that was regarded as weak, he made research because of his scholarship in hadith, and his opinion, he considered that strong, or the weak to be stronger, and the more strong relatively, that there is some illah or weakness in that hadith. But that's a scholarly type of word. They could differ. So if there is that legitimate difference of opinion, obviously, to deduce a ruling, of course, could be different. Secondly, as I alluded to in the presentation also, it's quite possible also that, especially for other authoritative past opinions, that it was given by an imam, especially the great imams, the earlier ones, because he was not aware, not everybody had awareness of hadith. It wasn't even collected systematically as was done later in Bukhari and Muslim and all of that. So there seemed to be evidence that he was not aware of that hadith. Okay, so there are some people who follow him and say no, others say no. If he had known of that hadith, as he said, we'd have followed that hadith. But still, somebody said, no, I don't want to venture that. Okay, it's legitimate. I'll give you an example, a contemporary one, where respect of the other opinion, even if you consider that a weaker opinion, should be respected. We were discussing with our dear brothers, our hosts, on this issue of hijab and niqab. Okay, particularly the niqab, the face cover. Until today, you find also authoritative jurists who differ on that. Some scholars mainly in the Gulf area say it is wajib, the covering of the face is required, and they give the reasoning. Other scholars said no, there is evidence, including Albani, who is himself a Salafi, by the way. So even within the same trend of people being called one group or the other, you find difference of opinions. He's known to be a very strong Salafi and a scholar of hadith, and he showed that indeed covering of the face is not a requirement, and he responded to another great authoritative scholar like Maulana Maududi, who took a different view about covering of the face. You see what I mean on that issue? It is all based on how we understand the hadith, how we understand not only one hadith or two, the totality of a hadith that might shed light on that. So we shouldn't be disturbed to that. Now your question basically, what are we to do? Where if a person has basic knowledge that he can look at the evidence, read enough, and you don't have to be a graduate of an Islamic school, read the evidence given by the scholars, and you feel that one of them seems to be stronger, or more, applicable to the realities that Muslims are living in, you can say, all right, intiqa'i, I'll follow that opinion on that particular issue. There's nothing wrong. Let me give you a practical example I used many times. Imam Shafi'i, for example, is of the opinion that, or the Shafi'i madhab in general, that you cannot have Jum'ah prayer unless you have 40 people. Right? Is it mentioned in the Quran? No. Is it directly mentioned in Hadith? No. Imam Shafi'i was right in a way because maybe his intention was that when it comes to Jum'ah, don't fragment the Muslims in a given community. When he said only at least 40, so you don't get every zawiyah, 5 people making Jum'ah here and there. And this is why the concept of al-Masjid al-Jami', Jami' mosque in Jum'ah. Okay? Is he wrong? His intention is good and it's applicable until today in situation like that when you went to gather Muslims together. Yet other madhahib say, including Imam Abu Hanifa, that what is required even for Jama'ah prayer could be for Jum'ah. 3 people, 4 people even can have Jum'ah. Some jurists go as far as saying that. ما تنعقد به صلاة الجماعة تنعقد به صلاة الجماعة. They're quite clear on that. Now, were they wrong? They're not wrong. But maybe they're addressing a situation that we faced firsthand in North America when the number of Muslims was very, very few, and you get into some campuses where you get 20, even 30 Muslim students studying there for 4 years. There is no nearby masjid, but their number, just to exaggerate it, it's not, it's a reality, even 39. They're one short of 40. Are we going to tell them, if you follow the Shafi'i madhab, and many of them, for example, were from Malaysia, with a strong Shafi'i stronghold, no, you must abide by Shafi'i jurisprudence, don't look at any other fiqh or jurisprudence, and for the 4 years, you don't pray Jum'ah? Does that really stand to reason? And the objective of Jum'ah, which is Farida, which has a good purpose of getting the battery charged, you don't pray for 4 years because you say, I must follow Shafi'i to the letter, even if one is missing, no Jum'ah. If it's in the Quran, yes. It's not in the Quran hadith. It is rewardable ijtihad with a given intention. You get my point? This is a good illustration of where one can shift to another imam, because the purpose of all a'imma is to enable you to do salah and in largest jama'ah as possible. If a person doesn't have that ability to do it, then ask someone you trust, who's knowledgeable, who's aware also of differing opinions and aware of the given situation that you're living in, the reality. And if you trust the person, you're free to follow him. If you're so confused, you can just try your best, because whatever you follow from authoritative opinions is okay, inshallah. So there are various levels or methodology of doing that, but the main thing, my wasiyah, my exhortation to myself first and others, don't downgrade others. Okay? You find, I'll be very frank. The Quran is quite clear about reaching to people in their language. In Surah Ibrahim, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَسُولٍ إِلَّا بِلِسَانِ قَوْمِهِ لِيُبَيِّنَ لَهُمْ. We have not sent a messenger except in the language of his people so that he can explain to them. I know and I respect the opinion of many of my Hanafi brothers who believe that the khutbah must be in Arabic, even if it takes 2 minutes. And sometimes you have to go through 2 processes in Jum'ah by giving the pre-khutbah lecture. And that caused me some confusion today because I'm not used to that. Anyway, to give a pre-khutbah or in English, and then another imam comes 2 minutes just to recite something in Arabic. I respect that view. But in the meantime, it doesn't mean that if an imam take this ayah in the Quran, an opinion of many other jurists, that you can just go, sit on the minbar, say salamu alaikum, have the adhan, give the khutbah in whatever language people understand, except when you're quoting the Quran or hadith, and you give also the translation. You don't say that their prayer is deficient or void. Nor should one say that the brothers who follow this Hanafi opinion are so rigid. I might be more inclined to the second opinion, but I respect the first one. So this is a matter not only of finding the answer, but our attitude in respecting other valid opinion.
Dr. Farooq Mahmood, gynecologist. Professor Badawi, may I congratulate you on an excellent presentation and distinction between reforming Islam and reforming Muslims. That is the essence which has to be understood by a lot of people. My question is about the contemporary role of madhabs in judicial rulings. Just to give you an example, even though we greatly admire the 4 imams, sometimes it leads to problems about decision making. For example, the question of abortions. All the Imams agree that to save the life of the mother, it is allowed, irrespective of the time.
Save the life of the madhab, you said?
No, to allow all the madhabs agree on performing an abortion to save the life of the mother. But of course, Imam Hanifa says 120 days, and Imam Shafi says 42 days, and Maliki and Hanbali says none at all. The problem is when you are faced with a situation like this, it is a bit difficult to know which one to follow and which one should be the correct ruling. And in contemporary society today, we must accept the fact that despite these great rulings, which are probably right in their own domain, today I think there has to be some kind of consensual organization which will give a better framework for professionals to work on.
Jazakallah khair. This is a very good and profound question, and I'm glad that, alhamdulillah, we're getting the interaction that should be there, the drawing on the experience, all of us, including myself, to draw on the experience of Sharia scholars as well as the experts in their